一段不被祝福的婚姻。
为什么一个人这么爱他老婆，这么忍心殴打他的太太，最后就从爱变成恨？
两条小生命的无辜断送。
Hou Kang even saying that she put her foot on Ghazali's head so that he could be drowned.
这是人性的凶残所致。
He used the weakness of his victims and played on that weakness until the victims fell for whatever he said.
还是一股邪恶力量的无形操控。
这个房间里面真的是满天神佛，布满着一种阴森的气氛。我叫何英，在新加坡华文主流报纸工作了45年。70年代，你懂这个教育也不是很普遍啊，所以还是有很多人求神拜佛啊，很迷信的都有了。
我是来自龙虎山的李大祥，是新加坡禅宗寺的智严法师。我们是做法事的。法术、巫术是不一样的东西。法术呢，我们是正能量的东西，完全是光明可以看得到的，所以我们是以法术而救人的、渡人的。这巫术东西是来自邪派的东西，害人还是会迷糊人，会给人家带来负能量的问题。
所谓驱魔这回事情，当时是蛮普遍的。
我自己有一个 case， 那个年轻人每次会幻听到他跟他讲你要死，你不死你父母就会死，所以他真的跳下去。好彩那时候才3楼罢了，爸爸来请我过去，所以就跟他看看，确定有这个空间的东西在骚扰。
2007年。新加坡发生了一起牵涉巫术的事件，它不但破坏了一对印度族夫妻的婚姻，最后还酝酿成了一场悲剧。
我是陈伟林副教授，我是新加坡国立大学副教务长，也是法政科学系的主任。其实这个案子跟其他案子不同，在这个案子我就是那个主控官。
My name is Dr. Kenneth Koh. I'm a senior consultant forensic psychiatrist with the Institute of Mental Health, and I was the expert for the state in forensic psychiatry on this case of Tarima Vijayan.
其实这个案件的挑战是因为它不只是一个现场。如果你看其他的案子，你会看是一个现场，这边是好多个现场。
史德林路位于新加坡的女皇镇，当时这起命案就发生在这里的住宅区，一名少妇的尸体被发现倒卧在祖屋楼下。
Hello, Dr. Koh.
Hi.
Good morning.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, we are at Sterling Road, and this is the bus stop in front of Block 181 Sterling Road.
That's right.
You can see the placard number 1. This
Yes.
Was where it started.
2007年7月1日凌晨，这个名为 Mira 的少妇独自坐在巴士站的凳子上，等待丈夫 Tarima 的出现。
When he saw his wife, he was rather upset, and in his words, he said that she was dressed up rather sexily. That night she was out partying with her friends. He was also out partying with his friends.
That's right.
And he said that she wasn't looking after the kids. Police investigations found that there were bloodstains at the bus stop. blood stain started from here. The drips were circular in nature due to gravity, so she was dripping blood from the place that she was beaten up. Now at the second crime scene, on our left is the bus stop, and on our right, it's a short flight of steps. So what the police found on the day were more circular blood drops on these steps. And this indicated that she was bleeding, probably upright.
从一开始的巴士站、阶梯，通往祖屋的路上，警方都发现了不少血迹。尤其在电梯大堂，罪案调查组搜寻到了更多的物证。
So Dr. Koh, now we are at the fourth crime scene. The blood spatter patterns were actually concentrated on the lower part of the lift door. The forensic scientists in court opined that these blood spatters could be due to punching, slapping, and even kicking of her. Actually, will you be able to comment on the state of mind of Tareema at this point in time?
I believe that he still knew what he was doing. The sequence of actions that he had carried out so far were actually goal-directed, and there was a logical sequence to his actions as well.
Are you able to comment why she was so defenseless?
Firstly, she was probably already very tired because she had a night of partying. She was also significantly intoxicated. You remember that she was hit with such great force that her tooth even fell out just outside of the lift lobby. So all these factors would have made her weak and in pain and unable to defend herself.
为什么丈夫会这样无情地殴打自己的妻子？在案发之前，两人之间到底发生了什么事？
I'm presently a lawyer in private practice. My name is Glenn Jayasingham Knight. There's no doubt he loved his wife. There's no question about that. In his talk to me, he never said that he killed her himself.
被告 Tareema 是一名散工，案发当年他38岁，而他的妻子 Mira 32岁。 事发5年前，两人喜结良缘，然而这段婚姻却不被女方的家人支持。信奉印度教的 Tareema 不愿跟随女方改信回教，因而埋下了冲突的种子。
He did allege that a spell had been cast by his sister-in-law, his wife's sister, and that had resulted in his wife behaving in an erratic manner that contributed to their marriage breaking up.
降头东西是细菌学，这细菌给你吞下去，还是给你吸下去，会慢慢长大，它就会发作的。
I've heard of people who hear voices. They actually hear voices, and that's a very difficult thing to think about, you know.
后来 ，Tareema 在国内外请教了几位巫师，试图解除对他们施加的咒语，然而情况并没有好转。
另外一个地方的声音会跟他讲很多不好的东西、不能的东西，他就照去做，所以才会产生这样的命案。
Mira 承受了好几年的家暴，一直到2006年，她决定申请人身安全保护令。同年，她的丈夫 Tareema 出轨，甚至被她抓奸在床。Mira 选择离开家里，跟另一名男性同居。 进而加剧了夫妻关系的恶化。
You could have seen that he was really upset, really concerned, really unhappy with his wife. Apparently, her ex-boyfriend had gone there, and I thought maybe he could have assaulted her.
专家们在案发现场没找到 Mira 前男友的 DNA， 但在电梯内却还原了更多的犯罪过程。
There were drag marks on the floor. This showed that she was pulled in, dragged in, rather than she walked in herself.
Right.
So the blood stains are concentrated on all the walls, and they are all flying upwards. The droplets, the tail moving upwards. And this indicated that she was already low-lying, just like outside. And she was being punched here or slapped here or she was being stepped on. This caused the blood spatter to move outwards in this direction. You know, surprisingly, around this area, there's one patch of circular stains, very unlike the rest of the droplets that I mentioned earlier on. Tarima is so angry that he punched, and he actually left his blood and DNA behind.
Right. And it must have been with so much force that he actually caused himself to bleed as well.
You're right.
罪案调查组找到了 Tarima 的 DNA，Tarima 却告诉他的律师，对于案发当天他没有什么印象。
他看到的是假的、虚的，是没有的。
The bus drivers had seen him on the ground floor, and his shirt was completely clean. And from the defense's point of view, if you have a prosecution witness saying something like that, it's such a great thing.
Tarima 的这个谋杀案子，其实是花了蛮长的时间。谈到他的妻子的时候，我会感觉到他有那种对妻子的爱意。那其实我自己在问，为什么一个人这么爱他老婆，会最后也把他老婆杀死了？
Some of the things that happen with people being involved so closely, you cannot be absolutely sure whether they had the intention to kill.
他说他很生气，他说我太太为什么没有在家里陪孩子？他就是打了他太太。他不是说 on the spur of moment， 他突然间生气，他突然间要把他的太太杀死，其实就是一段路程。
I'm sure he did have an anger management problem, and this is evidenced by his past history of violence to the wife, breaching of the personal protection order, and other instances as well in his past history.
案发后，罪案调查小组沿着一路的血迹来到了祖屋顶楼，发现了至关重要的线索。
So Dr. Koh, now this is at the 6th crime scene, and we are on the 13th floor. Take a look. So it's where she landed. Even I have to tiptoe. On the day when the deceased was brought out of the lift by the accused person, she was placed over here. And according to his version, she was already seated down here and she was bleeding.
根据报告显示 ，Mira 生前患有抑郁症。 因此 ，Tarima 的辩护律师也提出了死者自杀的可能性。
She had apparently attempted suicide on that floor, and because she was also intoxicated herself, and so that could have affected her mind. And you know, when you're pushing and pulling at that point in time, she could have easily let go because she wanted to commit suicide.
My name is Dr. Marian Wang. I'm from the Health Sciences Authority Forensic Medicine Division. Whether it's a murder or a suicide is not for the forensic pathologist to determine, it's actually for the courts to determine. But we help in the reconstruction of the scene and in providing information.
由于这是一起非自然死亡案件 ，Mira 的遗体必须进行解剖化验，找出真正的死因。
The cause of death for the late Miss Mira is multiple injuries due to the fall from height, especially the skeletal fractures, because that require a huge amount of force. The tooth was missing. The tissue around the eyes and cheeks was very puffy and bruised extensively. However, the injuries over the face suggest that she was probably beaten up prior to death. And that is because it's not easy to bruise a dead body.
I'm Grace Wong. I'm currently the Deputy Lab Director of the Forensic Chemistry and Physics Lab at Health Sciences Authority.
通过血溅形态分析，专家也可以协助判断死亡的方式。
Bloodstain pattern examiner is always considering various scenarios and alternative hypotheses. So we are expecting to find bloody palm prints on the railings if the deceased had committed suicide in an attempt to climb over the railings.
Because you know that she was seriously injured prior to death and that someone had actually walked away from the scene of death. So for this case, foul play is highly suspected.
为了还原真相，节目组重建了案发现场，邀请法证专家陈伟林副教授和高文武医生对案件进一步剖析。
Dr. Koh, now we are at the crime scene on the 13th floor. The accused put the deceased to this corridor outside the first unit from the lift. Take a look at this heavy bloodstains along the 13th floor corridor. This indicated that the deceased was here for some time. Let's take a look at the placement of the bloodstains at the lower part of the parapet wall and also the directionality. If you follow my fingers, you'll see that the tail is moving upwards. If he continued to assault her, like this or like this, kicking, punching, slapping, all these movements will create this movement because you...
在护栏上，专家们也发现了一撮沾有血迹的头发。
The question is, why do we see some blood-stained hair over here? It must be because she was bleeding. And when the neighbors heard that there was banging sounds, possibility could be that he was holding on to her hair and he then smashed her head against the railing. So we can see blood stains on the outer parapet wall. It must be that she was pivoted here and she was bleeding already from her mouth. She was assaulted prior to that with a avulsed tooth. According to the forensic scientists, more than a moment, enough time for her blood to be accumulated on each and every floor. Then it would be relatively easy for the accused to tip her over this way.
针对辩方提出死者自杀的可能性，专家们从多个方面进行了分析。
If she had actually climbed onto the wall and jumped off, there would have been a bigger trajectory away from the wall.
The deceased was about 161 centimeters tall, and she wore a pair of boots with heels about 7.5 centimeters. This meant that she was about 168.5 centimeters that night. Perhaps we can get someone who's about her height to demonstrate.
Thank you very much for coming. We were just wondering whether you'd be able to see whether you could actually climb over this parapet yourself.
It's quite difficult for me. I cannot, it is so height.
In terms of whether or not the deceased had committed suicide, HSA had considered that possibility and determined that it was unlikely because there were no bloody palm prints found on the railings.
On that night, actually, she was found with blood alcohol content of 177 milligram per 100 milliliters of blood.
That would have rendered her quite intoxicated at that point in time.
那她的心态其实就没有说想要自杀。在法医的角度上说，如果一个人流了这么大量的血，其实你都没有力气，你在地上已经躺住了，没有力气了，你怎么把自己握起来？
So all these factors put together would have caused her to be almost impossible for her to have hoisted herself over and therefore kill herself.
He had this person who had, his sister-in-law had told him that she had cast a spell on the deceased, and this, that she was a dark object.
这是来自他们另外的空间来骚扰他，所以他才会产生这样的问题。
2007年7月1日， 女皇镇的史德林路发生了一场坠楼惨案。32岁的 Mira 被发现躺在一座祖屋楼下时，早已没有生命迹象。而本案的嫌凶是她的枕边人，38岁的 Tarima。
就是很心酸，这是一个家庭的悲剧。Tarima 相信他的妻子的家人 put a hex on their relationship。他们每天回来的时候就会吵架，然后就说不好听的话。他们其实是很爱对方的，最后就从爱变成恨。
His sister-in-law had told him that she had cast a spell on the deceased, and that she was a dark object and things like that. So, in reality, it is hard to say what could have happened at that point in time.
根据 Tarima 的口供，由于巫术的影响，他在案发当天以为他的太太是一个不明的黑色物体，于是他把她抱起来后，就从13楼往下扔。
有的人随时产生幻听的，有的产生幻看的，这都是有。这是来自他们另外一个空间来骚扰他。他想到他的太太是某某东西会害他的，某某的鬼还是某某的仇人，如果没有杀死他，他就没有安心。
The trouble with black magic in our time, everybody believes in it. You know, people do think about these things.
新加坡有另外一起牵涉了巫术的杀童案，在42年前轰动了整个社会。尽管事过境迁，它在很多人的心中却留下了挥之不去的阴影。
Three people convicted for the ritualistic killings of 2 children 5 years ago, 8-year-old Agnes Ng Siu Huok and 10-year-old Ghazali Marzuki in their Tua Payoh flat.
It was widely believed that the children were sacrificed as part of the trail's cult practices.
这起案件的主谋是自称为灵媒的林宝龙，案发时39岁。另外2名共谋是他所招娶的圣妻，分别是26岁的第2任妻子陈美珠和25岁的情妇何家凤。
当时他的案件呈上去这个副检察署的时候，没有一个检察官敢借，只有这个 Glenn 借下来。为什么不敢借？怕他邪里邪气。华人所讲的敬鬼神而远之，就是即使你不相信鬼神，你也最好是不要去碰它。
No, I believed in the black magic, but I didn't believe Adrian Lim, and that was the difference because I was thinking of Adrian Lim as being an evil man, you know.
对于 Glenn Knight 来说，这是一段非常难忘的记忆。当年他是这起案件的检察官。
I was a God-fearing man, and I thought that he obviously taking advantage of the deities to get himself off. So I thought maybe this is something that I could do. You have to take on Adrian Lim in a case like this.
1980年代，比起独立前，新加坡的社会相对安稳。然而，在1981年，林宝龙却打破了大巴窑政府祖屋区的宁静。
Adrian Lim, when we moved in, they also new on this housing board, married 2 children. Later, they have an argument and quarreling very oftenly. I even can hear one of the sons telling the father, "Daddy, Daddy, don't hit mommy." And then of course, the wife is screaming and crying.
他们见过的人都讲他有一点邪气啊，古里古怪一样。
He become a changed man. He's wearing a lot of Buddha around his neck, so if you look at him, also scary.
从小就很迷信的林宝龙，喜欢钻研各类宗教。后来，他甚至沉迷于邪术魔法之中。
他的所谓法术啊，是有很多种， 比较普遍的是一种叫做蛋里寻针啊，就是鸡蛋里面啊，它藏了一支针，然后它就滚过那些女人的身体啊，然后讲说哦，这个里面有一支针变成黑色了，所以啊，你的身体里面有魔鬼啊，所以他就要驱魔了，他就骗那些女的上床，所以他就用这种骗财骗色。单单给他骗财骗色的女的有40多个。
I'm Richard Pereira, retired police officer, formerly attached to the Special Investigation Section of CID. I've been attached to the department since the late 70s until the early 90s.
Richard 是这起大巴窑杀童案的负责警探，对此案没齿难忘。1981年1月25日。他收到了第一个孩童的死讯。
Upon arrival at the scene of where the body was found, I saw a young lady in a fetal position that was forced into this bag. The head was at that time halfway out, and I heard a person specifically saying that her hair has been cut and her slippers have been cut. This is definitely a murder where the assailant did not want the spirit of the victim to haunt him or her.
By killing Agnes and putting her in a suitcase, cutting her sandals, all that, to him indicated that this was a ritual killing.
当时是警方开记者会，宣布这起案件的发生。我们只知道是一个女童被杀，一直到10多天过后，第二个学童，就是一个9岁的男童被杀的时候，警方才透露了很多惊人的消息。那个时候引起了社会的轰动。
Hi, Ricky.
Yeah,
we meet again.
Yes.
Another 40-year-old case.
Yeah, this is a serious major case in Singapore.
Yeah, unforgettable, and one of the cases that is embedded in me for the last 40 years.
Oh, I see.
Let's visit the scene.
Okay.
1981年2月7日，男童的尸首被发现躺在祖屋之间的草地上。距离第一个遇害女童的弃尸地点非常近，但这一次警方在现场发现了一些血迹。
Okay, from here, we followed some blood trail from the body of the child, right through here. Then the last few drops that we discovered were found in this area.
Okay.
The team proceeded along this corridor in that direction, whereas I decided to go alone in this direction to ensure that there were no blood spots in the area.
那次的现场勘查相当有难度，原因是在案发的前一晚，其实有人动了一些手脚。
So I heard there's someone. I suspected someone. Then I turned around. I saw Tan Bee Choo wiping the floor with a piece of towel. I suspected it could be blood stain. Otherwise, there's no reason why she wiping the floor. Then Adrian Dream must be 2 steps above. He was talking unang unang. So she stopped the wiping and they go back.
然而天网恢恢，疏而不漏。Richard 在6楼的阶梯发现了另一个线索。
Sorry, I went through all the staircase. I couldn't find one drop of blood. But around this area, on this 3rd staircase, I found an orange peel. I flipped the orange peel and I saw a drop of blood.
Oh, I remember the time is Chinese New Year.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yes.
So I decided to further check the area for any other drops of blood. And there's a man who was 3 doors away from his house. Turned around and said, "Are you looking for me?" I asked him, "Is this your house?" And he said, "Yes." And when I looked up, I saw a lot of this icon and talisman all hanging above his door. I said, "Can I see your house? Inside your house?" He said, "Sure."
这名神色自若的男子就是罪案的主谋林宝龙。
And as he opened the door, there is this smell of incense. And I noticed this altar, this multi-religious altar with burning candles. It did make my hair stand, when I went in. I felt a bit uncomfortable in a sense.
这个房间里面真的是满天神佛布满着一种阴森的气氛。除了有这个华人祭拜的神像以外那么也有其他宗教的，包括印度教基督什么都有了。
如果看这照片，这个家呢，不用去也知道这个家很阴沉的、很潮湿的。我相信他每次都是穿林不关注的、不见光的。耶稣也有，什么都有，乱七八糟，还有那种泰国的很多东西掺在里面，太多太杂了。他真的走火入魔了，这个人。
As I was instructing him, I looked in the kitchen and I saw red dots that appeared to be drops of blood. But when I looked at him, he said candle wax. So I looked at his altar and they were white candle wax. So I knew he was already lying. And then when I turned around again and looked, he said chicken blood. So I said, okay, you take a seat first. He told me he wanted to go to the toilet. I watched him, and before he moved up, the sleight of hand, he lifted up the carpet and removed a clump of hair. I said, where are you going with that hair? Put it back. It was like a eureka moment, And I said, finally, I think he's the one.
Richard 继续在林宝龙的家里进行搜索，很快的，他找到了非常关键的物证。
As I was flipping the phone book, a piece of paper came out with the name Agnes Ng Siu Hyuk, her phone number.
Richard 接着搜查，又在一本笔记本里看到了男童 Ghazali 的名字和资料。
Before even I turned around and asked him, who are these people? He said, both of them came to the house for help. I gave them money and they left. By then, I had sufficient evidence to pinpoint him to both murders. The murder of the young girl and the boy, Agnes and Ghazali.
是什么原因让这两个小孩的性命被无情剥夺？林宝龙所谓的法术又有什么不可告人的秘密？
Shot one, take one.
My name is Dr. Jacob Rajesh. I'm a senior consultant psychiatrist. Adrian Lim was a medium. He was involved in a lot of rituals, religious rituals. And he was a person who was very probably charming, especially to women.
我在报章有写娱乐稿，那替一家夜总会做一些监制的宣传那么那个时候，林宝龙跟第二任太太是在这个夜总会底下的一个舞厅里面表演双人艳舞就是女的穿3.4，那么男的哪一个边
Catherine Tan was working in a bar as a hostess and had a troubled life before she met Adrian Lim. She, in fact, was happy that Adrian was giving her extra attention.
I'm Sister Gerard Fernandez, a Good Shepherd sister. Catherine Tan Wee Chu. She was my pupil, and I knew her very well. And that was a big shame for her, because she was a very good girl. When she left and mixed with wrong companions, she just turned to a life that wasn't healthy.
他们也是非常迷信的人，那么尤其是何家凤，智商有点问题的，所以就很容易受林宝龙的摆布了。
And human nature can do the most evil things. And he made these two girls his slaves.
当时何家凤是一名有夫之妇，为了娶她为圣妻，林宝龙竟然不择手段。
Benson Loh was the husband of Ho Kah Hong. So what happened was, on the pretext of curing Benson of his bad luck, he decided to use his electrocution equipment to electrocute both Benson and Ho Kah Hong.
Adrian had told Ho that her husband was actually doing something against her, which reinforced her delusional beliefs.
But in this case, Ho Kah Hong just suffered a mild reaction to electrocution. But Benson collapsed and died. Adrian asked Ho to concoct a story when the police arrived to tell them Benson was electrocuted while trying to fix a faulty fan.
警方在事后的调查过程中揭开了更多惊人的内幕。
Ho Kah Hong and Catherine were the ones that revealed everything about Adrian's activities. The murder of the two children, Ghazali and Agnes, was because he wanted to take revenge against the police for inconveniencing him over this false rape charge against him, which he claimed to be false.
It was the fact that he did sodomize Agnes, which was unfortunate, but he was also a fiend about women. Apparently they were drowned. There was a rubber basin, a big basin, and they filled it up with water and they put their heads into that water, and that was the actual cause of the death of both of them. I remember Ho Kah Hong even saying that she put her foot on Ghazali's head so that he could be drowned.
为什么林宝龙的第二任妻子陈美珠和情妇何家凤会帮他行凶？他们是心甘情愿，还是逼于无奈？
He was probably using his powers of his personality like charm, smooth talking, and also I think he was telling them that he had special powers and he could kind of help them with their difficulties in their life.
In my personal opinion, I think that whatever Adrian Lim practiced was a ruse. He could not perform any magic. It was basically trickery. He used the weakness of his victims and played upon that weakness until the victims fell for whatever he said.
The mistress, Ho, in fact, she was diagnosed to have schizophrenia, which is a psychotic illness. People with schizophrenia are probably more vulnerable to being pressured or being coerced in doing something.
他们三人最终都被控上了法庭。当时来听审的人络绎不绝，这宗祭祀谋杀案引起了社会很大的关注。
当时他说他是供奉这个新都教的卡利女神啊，这个卡利女神好像有3个姐妹，其中一个是要吸血的，很喜欢血，所以他就杀那个小孩，把小孩的血拿来供奉给卡利女神，以便加强他自己的法力。那么这个是林宝龙自己在法庭上讲的，那么是不是谎言，也只有他本身才心知肚明。
在法庭上，如果巫术可以被承认是一个辩护的一个理由，那很多人都说是巫术导致他变成另外一个人，那就可以脱罪，法庭就不会接受这样的理由。
2007年的史德林路谋杀案，嫌凶塔瑞玛坚称巫术破坏了他和妻子米拉的感情，最后甚至导致了妻子的死亡。
There was a lot of regret. There was a lot of regret. He was very unhappy that he had killed. There was definitely a lot of alcohol, and this fellow was totally drunk.
Intoxication certainly can produce states where people become unaware of their actions, but it was definitely not the case with Tarema. He was able to fully describe his actions in a sequential manner.
他在殴打他的太太的时候，不是有一盆血在地上，他踩到他的血，你会看到他从13楼，他的血印就这样在地上走，从13楼走到12楼，然后到了12楼，他就按了电梯，电梯去了2楼。其实他知道自己在做什么，他知道有这么血淋淋的电梯。如果到了1楼，人家在1楼一看就知道他就是嫌疑犯，所以他知道他要在2楼停。 停了出来，没有人知道，神不知鬼不觉，他就可以走掉了。那时候他还打了电话叫他朋友来载他。那你看到他的行为之前、中间和最后的行为，都不是被巫术控制的。
在法庭上，辩方的精神科医生提出 ，Tarema 患上了被害妄想症，应该减轻刑事责任。
The so-called delusion was his wife's sister had put a charm on their marriage, causing their marriage to break up. The defense psychiatrist couldn't explain that how this then led to Tarema killing his wife.
Somebody expressing that they can do black magic or they're subject to black magic doesn't qualify them to be suffering from a mental health condition.
I thought it was good enough point to make, and that's the best that I could do. But I suppose at that time, different prosecutors have different points of view.
一场悲剧的发生，对家人的影响往往是最大的，而那种伤痛也难以抹灭。
He was worried about his family. He wanted someone to look after his kids, and that was unfortunately something that was so difficult for him to handle.
我看到那幕真的很心酸，他就把手这样每天就这样放出来，隔了一层玻璃，他的小孩的手小小个就开始要碰爸爸，说为什么碰不到爸爸？爸爸几时回家？妈妈在哪里？
事发后 ，Tarema 在报纸上刊登了一则悼文，表达了对妻子 Mira 的思念和爱意。
My dearest beloved Mira, you had a smiling face and a pleasant heart. It's a pleasure to recall the memories of you. My beloved wife. We only had 5 years together, which we had 2 beautiful children. Times changed, destroyed our lives in many ways. You suffered a violent death and a sad life, but it's left us with painful thoughts to bear. I don't have the words to describe the pain.
May you remain in loving memories of loved ones. Love you, my dear, till we meet. 我看了这一篇过后，我其实那时蛮辛苦的。为什么他那天他不会把自己的手收起来？为什么那天他就把他的自己最爱的一个人，把他抛下楼？
至于大巴窑杀童案，尽管事发已经42年，很多人还是无法走出阴霾。
A case of this nature, where it was ritualistic, children killed, people became afraid.
It's hard for the victims' families. Ghazali's mother gave an interview after 35 years, and I read that, and I think she's a brave woman. To be able to calm yourself down, say a prayer, and try to let go is a big thing.
所以法术还是要靠法律来制裁、来控制。如果面是乱七八糟的，我们的法术是会来救人、来渡人、来劝导人、来安慰人，不会去吓唬人，不会去增加你的负能量，我们不会的。
最重要的就是要提醒大家，不要这样容易去相信 这种迷信的东西。我们要用比较冷静的头脑来分析事情，不要一味追随人家讲什么你就信什么。
你可以通过 Medicine 应用程序、Spotify 或 Apple Podcast 收听更多真实奇案。